Kenny Eric gave another KE Consulting production. As always, appreciate if you hit that like and subscribe button. You're watching this wherever. You can find us on Instagram at k.e.consulting, on the website keneerike.com. What we're going to talk about today are 3 tips for avoiding unhealthy communication, the kind of toxic behaviors that ruin the relationships that you're in, all sorts of relationships. I don't know yet what I'll title this video, but it probably will fit in the ongoing series of how to grow a church, which is not necessarily about church functions per se, but any group that you're a part of, and how not to be one of those people that people don't want around. So we're going to talk about 3 tips related to that. And always, I would encourage you to check out the article that accompanies this video. I'm going to post a link to that article in the description box. I usually like to embed images and videos in the articles that you can't see in the original video. So I always encourage you to check them both out. And I'm going to look at some notes here to add to what we're talking about, because I haven't posted in a while. And the beauty of certain breaks, even forced or voluntary hiatus, is that it gives you time to reflect, think about things that are important to you, which are useful, especially since no man or woman is an island, and the style in which you convey your desires has a major impact on your inner peace and how willing others are to accommodate them. So learning how to communicate with people in a way that doesn't anger them is something that's a big thing, and something you should learn to do, ideally sooner rather than later. And one recurring challenge you're going to face is the need to air your grievances and resolve conflict in a manner that doesn't poison your relationships. You want to learn how to do that. There are a few important goals that we accomplish solely on our own. There's no artificial intelligence yet that can substitute for emotional intelligence. And a lot of problems can be avoided if you steer clear of the common triggers most likely to set people off. Unfortunately, people aren't very good at doing this. You don't have to be one of those people. Healthy communication and conflict resolution on their own can be difficult. When you have to navigate both simultaneously, it's no wonder that anxiety and pain are familiar byproducts for everyone involved. So that's just something that came to mind that I figured we should talk about. Fortunately, there are a few precautions we can head towards, at least keep in mind, that can help you with avoiding a lot of toxic communication habits that people do. So I'm going to talk about 3 of them in this video. First one that I thought this was a good title. Your life is a game. Personal attacks, you commit those at your own risk. The second one we'll go into a little later. One man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist. It's all about perspectives and the folly of moral absolutes. And number 3, win the battle or lose the war. You want to keep the end in mind. So let's talk about number 1 first. Your life is a game. Personal attack others at your own risk. I'll come into a little scripture here. Proverbs 15 verse 1. A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. Words are powerful. A verbal jab intended to ding someone who has bothered you in one way or another. It feels great, no doubt about that. And rather than devote the cognitive energy to laying out your position clearly, or if you've been met with repeated brick wall-like reception, you know what that's like when you're dealing with people who don't listen. Calling someone stupid or insult can seem like the best course of action. You try to be cool about it, get your point across quickly, and they weren't having it. Absent just walking away and swallowing your displeasure, what other choice do you have? Unfortunately, name calling is one of the worst moves you can make. It's usually a route marker on the road to a strained relationship. Too much venom, not enough discretion, and too few apologies accelerate the process to damage relationships. We want to avoid that. Guilting and shaming tactics are close cousins to personal insults, often employed as a means to silence dissent or manipulate others. I'm sure you've been there. If you've ever heard phrases such as "don't you care about" or "everyone else thinks" attached to a side of an argument, you know what I mean. Those are intellectually dishonest, and I don't have a lot of respect for them personally. When others try to win an argument through underhanded means, it's infuriating. Controlling the behavior of others is a tough task. We do better to focus on ourselves here, even when we're the victims of someone else's bad behavior. As always, you want to check yourself first. How can you improve? Are you undertaking actions that arouse strife even when you're standing on the right side of a disagreement? Can you be more communicative? Are you open to feedback? Do you need to curb your attitude when adversity comes to your door? I'm a 100% accountability person, so I'm not a huge fan of finger pointers and people with double standards. I'm sure you may be the same. Beyond that, how do we call out bad behavior? Well, the first thing you got to do is you got to start with empathy. You got to try to put yourself in the mind of someone else and understand how they see the situation. Maybe they're in some sort of pain that they haven't spelled out well. When you start thinking about what another person is seeing and thinking and feeling, it's harder to demonize them. You start thinking about solutions that'll solve the problem instead of just personally attacking. That's the right way to go. And you also create a platform where people feel free to exchange ideas and not hold things back, which is one of the causes of strained relationships, when people feel like they can't be themselves. And you don't want to be one of those people that creates those environments. I'll give you an example. Let's say you're talking to someone about something that's particularly stressful. Maybe you start the conversation with this line. The situation's stressful, yes, and we can all, myself included, find ways to handle a number of matters better. I know I can be moody and a disinterested communicator at times. When you explain some of the negative impact of their behaviors on yourself as well, that helps, because if they're someone that's close to you, they may feel bad that they're hurting you in some way. You tell people about that, it can help. So you can say something like, it really hurt my feelings that you thought I was selfish. I don't like what you did and how you judge me. You start talking about how their behaviors make you feel and how they impact you, and people are much more likely to listen, not wave it off, especially if it's a friend or family member. If you got some sort of bond with them, they're probably listening. So in general, with this first step, this first tip, you want to talk about the action and the problems, not the person. Don't attack people. It's not going to help. You want to be very careful about ascribing motive to other people's behaviors as well, because you're not in their head. You may be right, but you don't know necessarily what's causing the behaviors. You want to be careful about saying things about that. That leads us to our next tip. Number 2, one man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist. Perspectives and the folly of moral absolutes. So if you ever heard lines such as, this is someone talking to you, or even you might be saying this, I don't agree with this view, so there's something wrong with it, and the person who's sharing it, or you don't do what I want to do, so that means you're selfish and don't care as much as I do, or, I'm not aware of what you're saying here pertaining to the situation, so if you say something that I may not be aware of, you must be lying, you must be making up because I know everything. People may not say that last one as much, but they may be thinking it without saying it. And the nature of just being alive and on earth is variety is the spice of life. There's so many different perspectives and viewpoints and proclivities, most of which are not inherently evil. And because there's differences we have with other people, worlds are going to collide. Conflict resolution and the ability to communicate healthfully and hear other perspectives outside of your own, that's key. It's a vital skill for getting things done. You got to be careful about pronouncing judgments on other people, especially in charged emotional situations. Maybe there was no malicious intent behind words and actions you considered innocuous, but that doesn't mean that the other person on the receiving end saw it that way. And really, it doesn't take much to create a rift with people. A single thoughtless comment can do that. Somebody at a family gathering says something slick. Now factions of cousins and uncles are squaring off at each other like the Hatfields and McCoys. I'll give you one concrete example of this in the flesh. Anyone who's ever dealt with caretaking of someone who's ill or for whatever reason is incapacitated for some capacity, there's always discussion about people involved. All right, who should be doing what? How do we divide up responsibilities? What's the procedure when there's no consensus on the next move? Those sort of situations are fertile ground for conflict and grievances about fairness and equity, complaints about someone not doing enough or doing too much, people disagreeing about what should be done. Everyone's got an opinion and thinks it should be done their own way. So, of course, there's going to be a lot of conflict there. And unfortunately with this, there's never a shortage of well-meaning people who are ready to volunteer someone else to do the hard work. Someone might say, oh, grandma needs to go to physical therapy 4 days a week. Great. Why don't you do that? Thanks for that suggestion. I mean, it's easy for people to give suggestions about what should be done when it's not them who's doing it. And I'm sure if you've dealt with group decisions of any sort, you know what I'm talking about. And when someone does something we don't like, it's often simple to assume, oh, there's some negative underlying trait that's generating that behavior or that thought. That's why they did it. Bill doesn't want to contribute to the company's annual charity drive to support kids in Africa. Must be cheap. Probably racist too. Those sort of thinking that happens in groups when someone has an idea or initiative that they want other people to support, but they're not doing it. So it must automatically mean that somebody else is wrong. Maybe with Bill in that situation I just came up with, he sees the idea of being forced to be charitable as some sort of contradiction in terms. Maybe he doesn't like the organization that you're supporting. Maybe he's got other things he wants to do with his money. It's his money, his time, etc. And I'll give you a useful psychological phenomenon. May have heard of it, may not. It's called the fundamental attribution error. I'll read what that says here. We attribute the behaviors of others to their disposition and credit situational elements for our behaviors. In other words, what they're saying is when we have a bad day, it's because a car broke down or family was angering us. When someone else has a bad day, it's because they're a jerk internally. They have a temper problem. You see how we don't really factor in the situational factors to explain why people do things, especially when it's something that we don't like, versus us, because we're present in everything that's happening in our head 24/7, that we can ascribe certain behaviors to certain situations. We don't give other people that same due, though. That causes problems. That's what the fundamental attribution error is. It's actually a phenomenon I've covered in previous articles. I will have a link to that in more detail if you want to check that out in the article in the description box. And that bias occurs not because of any inherent malice that we have towards other people, but because we struggle to put ourselves in the minds of others, especially while under stress. If we understand that, it might help to pause and think before we're quick to smear someone else when they do something differently than we might. For example, the caretaking thing. Instead of pointing out to your cousin that they didn't comb your mother's hair the way you wanted it to be combed, maybe you say, oh, I just want to thank you for taking my mother in the first place, taking the time to do that. Because a lot of times we're quick to point out what we don't like about someone, that's something they did, as opposed to stopping and giving thanks first, especially when we're talking about some sort of group collective. Thank yous go a long way, especially before you throw in criticism. And you're going to find that people get much more empathetic about what certain situations entail when they're thrown into the fire themselves and they no longer have the luxury of tiptoeing up around the perimeter. When it's you who actually has to do the work for some sort of group collective and you got to start bearing the cost of some of your own ideas, all of a sudden words like lazy and disinterested that you were quick to throw at someone else who had to do the work before, those somehow disappear because now it's you doing the work. Now you've got a whole new prism through which you're viewing the group collective, and all of a sudden you get more empathetic. It's funny how that works. And people also forget that you have to balance your own needs. when you're dealing with group situations and what people are requesting from you. So for you to say that some sort of prolonged course of action has a negative impact on your own life and your health, there's nothing wrong with that. Doesn't make you selfish, doesn't make you inconsiderate. I actually think, ironically, it's the people who say that to you and assume because you're not going along with their course of action, that's actually more selfish and inconsiderate than what they're trying to judge you as, because they're not stopping to think about what you might have going on your own end. But it's about, you're not doing what I want to do. There's no reason you shouldn't do what I want to do. So that means there's something wrong with you. You're selfish and inconsiderate. And people do that. And it's really something that could really put a wedge between people. And you want to avoid being one of those people that does that. And heaven forbid someone criticize you for a divergent opinion and preference. This is where a little hypocrisy comes in as well, is that a lot of times you'll find that the people who are quick to criticize and suggest that there's something wrong with why someone else views something that's different from the way they view something, they're the first people to get outraged and to take offense if someone says to them, I think what you're doing here is wrong. You don't understand, or how can you do this? They're the first people to go off on the handle without actually seeing the other side of it when they do that to other people. It's hypocrisy and double standards at its finest. People get outraged when they feel someone's wronged them. They use justifications or rationalizations when we do something that impacts someone else. And unfortunately, that happens a lot. Those are two of the things that help create toxic communication and splinter groups because of poor conflict resolution habits. And problems that could have been solved by just a kind word, or even better, intentional silence, linger on dissolving bonds. We don't need that. So don't be so quick to call someone a liar or wrong or evil if they don't agree with your position on a matter. Let me read another verse here that could be useful. Matthew 18:15-17. If your brother or sister sins, go and point out their fault, just between the two of you. If they listen to you, you've won them over. But if they will not listen, take one or two others along, so that every matter may be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. If they still refuse to listen, tell it to the church. If they refuse to listen, even to the church, treat them as you would a pagan or a tax collector. That's Matthew 18:15-17. Now, I didn't read that verse strictly to talk about gang up on other people. It doesn't even fit smoothly in what we're talking about here. I just like the whole take it to the person you have a problem with first mindset. You don't want to be talking about behind people's backs. We're not talking about excommunication here either. And there's a danger too of believing that just because multiple people believe a thing that means they're automatically right. There's a fallacy of consensus. That's a real danger when people assume that the amount of people that believe something dictates the veracity of what the situation is. Not true. It's the face-to-face accountability here. That's why I read that verse. So if someone brings an issue to you, a good course of action is stop and think about what they're saying to you before you react. And if someone is alleging that you've offended them, how do you handle it? Easy to talk about the other guy who should turn the other cheek when you've done something, but it's not. I think it's noble if the first thing you do is consider, all right, how might I have erred here, rather than assuming that it's someone else who did something, or it's the way they see it is wrong and you're not at fault. It's always good to just take a step back there. No one's infallible. And apart from God and the Holy Spirit, there are no set of tools or vantage point or perspectives that are universally supreme. So we got to understand things. Context matters. A rose in a well-manicured garden is an adornment. The same rose in a patch of ivy is a weed. So our goals and our priorities dictate the next best moves, which is why rather than assuming one perspective is dominant over the others, you want to keep the big picture in mind. That's a segue into number 3. Tip number 3. win the battle or lose the war. Keep that in mind. So most of what I push on my website and my platform centers on time-tested themes rather than micro-level responses to predictable events. And when you start viewing your life from a prism of big picture ideas and what I want to get accomplished, you're a lot less likely to be tripped up by a lot of the traps that other people fall into. And you start thinking about, all right, it's more about how I interact with the people in totality on a micro level rather than worry about what this particular instance, this situation is. I'm going to use a term here some of you may know, may not know. You ever hear of a Pyrrhic victory? It means that when you win a battle, but the costs are so high that you might as well have lost. That's often the de facto result of how we approach many of our interactions with other people. We're so focused on getting what we want when we want it that we don't consider how our moves today impact our environment tomorrow. And at heart, I'm a gamer, although I haven't played video games in any consistency in ages. I used to love Halo, Smash Brothers, Street Fighter, WCW, NWO Revenge, just to name a few over a number of consoles and decades. Nowadays, it's more about board games, the occasional board game gathering, and many, many weekends of sports, and even weekdays too. Different sports I love to play. That's what captures my attention. But a lot of those themes are still present there. What you find is that people who are consistently winners, who consistently find themselves in the mix as contenders, understand that hard work and the ability to manage the egos and priorities of other players is how you stay on top, because you're in a team competition. It's not just about you. You need diplomacy. That's more likely to have more staying power than just single-minded drive to accomplish something. And there are certain games, even first-person shooters, you're just going about taking people out, where you need to be able to call on others to assist with capturing a flag or holding some other objective. And even with enemy squads, you find that there are times when you have unspoken truces because there's other bigger threats you have to both go after. So we're going to have this armistice temporarily, and we're going to go figure out what we got to do about these bigger threats. And not just from a gaming lens, but you can see this in your personal life, business, family and friends, and sports teams. I know I've experienced this in multiple contexts where you need to come out on top in the here and now, but because either yourself or someone else was so focused on getting what they want in the context of accomplishing a goal that relationships have been strained, the dynamic is now altered so that it's very difficult for people to work together in harmony in the foreseeable future. So it really shouldn't be a surprise if you talk crazy to someone or you treat them in a way, no matter how justified you may feel you were, that either challenges who they are as a person, their values, and that just leads to issues with how they feel towards you. So it shouldn't be a surprise that they don't want to be around you or they're looking to get you back in some way. You want to avoid that. So it's not always about being right at times. Yes, it feels good to be right. You just want to prioritize creating environments where everybody feels comfortable being around you, speaking freely, being themselves. And the sort of toxic communication that we're talking about in this video is the exact thing that makes that difficult to accomplish. And listening to your spirit here, we talked about that in other videos. That can really help in terms of figuring out best courses of action. You want to stop trying to strong arm people into cooperating with you or your preferred course of action. And then if they disagree with you, you don't want to be telling them, something's wrong with you, instead of simply leaving it as a difference in perspective, which it often is. Again, nobody has the monopoly on being right. That's the kind of behavior we're trying to run away from. It's a sort of harmful communication you shouldn't want anywhere near your friends, family, or people you care about. If someone sees a situation differently, again, doesn't automatically mean there's something wrong with them. And if you operate from this lens where you're always assuming that you're correct, and any sort of difference in opinion means that there's something wrong with the other person, you're going to find out, okay, you were able to extinguish the immediate fire in front of you, but there's going to be all sorts of lingering embers that create fires that are combust at any moment because you're sowing seeds of discontent with people because you're not treating them the way they should be treated. You can see that in a lot of religious circles, unfortunately. We preach about God and Christ while we turn a blind eye to our own shortcomings, some of which drive people away from religion. When it comes to actually modeling the behavior we read in the Bible, it's always the other guy who's not working and walking with God, which is problematic. Ironically, that's actually now what Christ would espouse. He wants us to take a look at ourselves first before pronouncing judgment on other people. That's not easy, but you have to balance getting what you want and your own needs along with contributing to group collective. So you want to operate in a manner that gives you peace and aligns with what you're led to do. If you have to detach yourself from toxic situations or minimize certain interactions because others don't want to play by the same rules, you got to do what you have to do. Want to keep the main thing. That's a axiom I like to keep in my own mind. Because you're going to be judged anyway by a lot of people for whatever reason. So you might as well just do what gives you peace and worry about other things later. You want to do your part by not adding fuel to the fire, not engaging in toxic communication as well. Those are big. So those are 3 tips for handling unhealthy toxic communication and avoiding it. Now, in this video, I said I would cover 3 tips, but I think a 4th seems more fitting given what I just said. I'll say number 4, your happiness is your responsibility. Again, I'm a person who prizes 100% accountability. You always have choices, even if your plight appears grim or set in stone. You got one life to live, so you want to prioritize what matters most to you and your peace of mind, your happiness. Learning how to say no, that's a big thing. A lot of times people will try to impose on you and ask you to do X, Y, Z. You're going to grow tired and resentful if you're always accommodating other people's requests. So you got to have some sort of rubric in your mind or how you operate that's going to help you decide where your time and energy is best spent. You also want to remember that just because you say no to someone, that doesn't mean you're a bad person. Don't let people try to push you into something you don't necessarily want to do. Part of that responsibility, too, in terms of managing how you deal with other people, is you have to speak up. You have to let others know the rules of engagement regarding how they deal with you. You got to tell them, okay, to your coworker, friend, or family member, this is acceptable behavior. This is not acceptable behavior. They're not mind readers. You have to tell people these things. If you don't tell people how they're supposed to interact with you and how they treat you, then it's on you when there's things that happen that you don't necessarily like. Because you have to vocalize them. People won't know unless you vocalize. You got to muster up the courage to do that. Unless the 4 suggestions we covered here are really going to fall flat, not going to do much for you. And again, sometimes you may find that you need to distance yourself or at least minimize interaction with certain people. If you have to do that, you have to do that. It's addition by subtraction. If people want to criticize you for doing that, you just live with it. There are certain things you do to reduce that fear of loss of acceptance as well. Put it in its rightful place. I'll give you a couple of scripture here. Proverbs 29:25. Fear of man will prove to be a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord is kept safe. 1 John 4:18. There is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear, because fear has to do with punishment. The one who fears is not made in perfect love. So you want to practice the skill of minimizing the pressure, whether internally or externally, to conform to behaviors and requests that you don't necessarily agree with. You got to train others how to treat you. A lot of the stress from worrying about what others think and the internal pressure that will lead to negative health outcomes for you. So you want to keep this in mind, and just avoiding certain toxic situations, or at least minimizing how you interact with them, can be useful, because a lot of that can generate anxiety and that'll weigh you down. You don't need that. So, what would I say? Other notes related here. We live in an imperfect world with imperfect people, many of which unfortunately are unreasonable. So there are going to be times when you're faced with folks who will dig into their positions no matter how indefensible those stances may seem. It's even possible that some of you listening to this video might be those same people and not even recognize it. You might be those same villains who are impervious to reasoned, even-handed discourse. Hopefully you're not. Hopefully you find a way to resolve that internally. You just want to stay away from toxic communication and seek solutions that are less corrosive to the relationships around you. Do that, you're going to find yourself in a much better place. You got to take authority. You got to be the author of your best existence. So I would say that's enough on this video. I always love to hear from you. You ever felt pressure to comply with a request from a loved one? You can let me know about that. Comments, shoot me an email. You ever feel like you're looking for better ways to defeat the sort of guilt-tripping antics people use to try to get you to do what they want? Need help with that? Reach out. Again, the website, KENEERIKE.com, or Instagram at k.e.consulting. As always, please hit that like and subscribe button. Let me know what you think. Hopefully this finds you all well. Take care.